Every generation believes it is standing at the edge of something unprecedented. And in every generation, most people are wrong not because change is absent, but because they mistake novelty for inevitability. The true next big thing rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives quietly, unevenly, and often in forms that look impractical or incomplete at first. Books that examine technological inflection points agree on one thing: transformative technologies do not replace the world overnight. They seep into it, reshaping behavior long before they reshape industries. Emerging technologies are not defined by sophistication alone. They are defined by timing. A technology becomes transformative only when three forces align: technical feasibility, economic viability, and cultural readiness. Many breakthroughs fail not because they are flawed, but because the world is not ready to absorb them. Startups that succeed are not those that chase the newest invention, but those that recognize when conditions have quietly shifted enough to support scale. One of the first illusions surrounding emerging tech is that innovation is driven primarily by invention. In reality, most breakthrough startups are built on recombination. Existing technologies intersect in new ways. Computing power becomes cheap, data becomes abundant, connectivity becomes ubiquitous. Books on startup history show that the next big thing often looks like a convergence rather than a leap. What changes is not what is possible, but what becomes obvious. Artificial intelligence provides a clear example. AI existed for decades before it mattered. What changed was not intelligence itself, but accessibility. Tools that once required research labs became available through APIs. Costs dropped. Use cases multiplied. Startups did not invent intelligence, they embedded it into workflows that already existed. The opportunity emerged not from novelty, but from integration. Another insight the literature returns to repeatedly is that emerging technologies create opportunity by shifting constraints. What was once expensive becomes cheap. What was once slow becomes instant. What was once scarce becomes abundant. These shifts force entire business models to realign. Startups that spot these shifts early build companies not around technology, but around newly unlocked behavior. The technology is the enabler. The behavior is the opportunity. Books that study technological revolutions also emphasize the importance of second-order effects. The first wave of innovation builds tools. The second wave builds applications. The third wave reshapes institutions. Most startups fail because they enter too early or too late. The winners often appear in the middle when the infrastructure is stable enough to rely on, but the applications are still undefined. This is where risk and reward intersect most favorably. Another pattern emerges around adoption curves. Early adopters tolerate friction. Mass markets do not. Startups that succeed with emerging tech understand this difference intimately. They design products that hide complexity rather than celebrate it. They make the new feel familiar. Books consistently show that user experience, not technical superiority, determines which technologies cross the chasm into mainstream use. Regulation also plays a decisive role in shaping emerging opportunities. New technologies often operate in legal gray zones. Some startups exploit this ambiguity. Others prepare for its resolution. History suggests that the latter endure. As regulation catches up, companies built on fragile assumptions collapse, while those that anticipated constraint gain advantage. Emerging tech startups that survive are those that treat regulation as inevitable, not optional. Capital behavior offers another signal. Investors are drawn to narratives, but capital flows lag reality. The biggest opportunities often appear when enthusiasm cools, but fundamentals improve. Books on market cycles show that the next generation of dominant startups is often founded during periods of skepticism, not hype. When expectations reset, builders gain room to experiment without noise. Another overlooked dimension is talent. Emerging technologies attract curiosity before competence. Early builders are explorers. Over time, expertise accumulates. Startups that win long-term are those that transition from experimentation to execution at the right moment. They recognize when the era of tinkering ends and the era of scaling begins. This timing is subtle and decisive. The literature also warns against treating the next big thing as singular. Technological change is not linear. Multiple waves overlap. AI intersects with biotechnology. Climate tech intersects with materials science. FinTech intersects with identity and regulation. The most powerful startup opportunities often exist at these intersections, where no single incumbent feels ownership and no single playbook exists. Another insight emerges around narrative discipline. Founders chasing emerging tech are tempted to oversell the future, but books show that credibility compounds faster than vision. Startups that frame themselves as solving present problems with future leverage attract trust. Those that promise distant revolutions struggle to survive long enough to deliver them. The next big thing rewards patience disguised as ambition. As technologies mature, they also democratize power. What once required capital now requires creativity. What once required scale now requires insight. This democratization lowers barriers to entry but raises the bar for differentiation. Startups must compete, not on access, but on execution. The books emphasize that when tools become universal, strategy becomes decisive again. Over time, emerging technologies reshape expectations. Customers begin to assume capabilities that once felt magical: instant personalization, real-time feedback, predictive systems. Startups that anticipate these shifts build products that feel inevitable rather than impressive. The next big thing becomes invisible once it becomes standard. And this is where the story begins to focus. Because once founders understand that emerging technologies are not about chasing trends, but about recognizing shifts in constraints, behavior, and expectation, the question changes. It is no longer what technology is hot, but what new behavior is now possible and who is building for it responsibly. It is at this point where technical possibility meets human adoption that real startup opportunities emerge, quietly and unevenly, rewarding those who look past headlines and toward the deeper currents shaping the future. As innovation moves forward, not in bursts of spectacle, but in steady waves of capability, confidence, and consequence, unfolding patiently and powerfully, like a tectonic shift beneath the surface that reshapes the landscape long before anyone notices the ground has moved. And this is where emerging technologies stop being curiosities and start becoming foundations for entirely new categories of businesses. In the second half of the story, the focus shifts from possibility to positioning. Once a technology proves viable, the question is no longer whether it will matter, but who will translate it into value. History shows that the largest opportunities rarely go to the inventors of core technology. They go to the builders who understand context, who know which industries are ready, which users are frustrated, and which inefficiencies are finally exposed by new capabilities. One of the most consistent lessons from books on technological waves is that timing beats brilliance. Founders who arrive too early burn capital educating the market. Founders who arrive too late compete in crowded spaces with thin margins. The winners sit in the uncomfortable middle, where demand is forming but standards are not yet fixed. This is where startups can shape expectations instead of conforming to them. As emerging technologies mature, they also lower the cost of experimentation. Cloud infrastructure, open source frameworks, and APIs allow startups to test ideas rapidly. But this abundance creates a new challenge: noise. When everyone has access to the same tools, differentiation becomes harder. The startups that stand out are those that develop a clear point of view. They make opinionated choices about who they serve and what they refuse to build. Books repeatedly show that focus is the rarest advantage in periods of technological abundance. Another critical insight is that emerging technologies magnify ethical consequences. Scale arrives faster, impact spreads wider, mistakes propagate quickly. Startups operating at the edge of innovation must therefore make ethical decisions earlier than previous generations ever did. The literature is clear. Companies that delay these considerations pay later in regulation, backlash, or loss of trust. Responsible design is no longer optional, it is strategic. As opportunities crystallize, successful founders also learn to decouple hype from signal. Media cycles exaggerate breakthroughs. Valuations spike, and crash. But real adoption follows a slower, steadier curve. Books on past tech booms from the internet to mobile show that enduring companies often grow quietly while attention is elsewhere. They measure progress by retention, not headlines, by usage, not valuation. Another powerful shift happens when emerging technology becomes infrastructure. At this stage, the advantage moves up the stack. Tools become commodities. Value migrates to orchestration, experience, and integration. Startups that anticipate this transition avoid being trapped at the lowest margin layer. They build businesses that sit close to the user, where insight and trust matter more than raw capability. Over time, the next big thing stops being singular. It becomes embedded everywhere. Electricity disappeared as a novelty. The internet became assumed. AI, automation, and climate technologies are moving the same way. The startups that endure are those that design for this disappearance, building products that feel natural, not futuristic. When users stop noticing the technology, adoption accelerates. And so the story reaches its quiet conclusion. The next big thing is not a gadget, a model, or a breakthrough paper. It is a shift in what people expect to be possible. Startups that succeed are those that sense this shift early, act with restraint, and build with discipline, while others chase spectacle. They understand that technology opens doors, but judgment determines which ones are worth walking through. If this reflection resonated with you, pause and ask yourself one question. Which assumption in your industry has quietly stopped being true? That is where opportunity hides. Share that thought. And if you want to keep exploring how founders turn emerging capabilities into enduring companies, stay connected, subscribe, follow, and return. Because the future is not built by those who predict it best, but by those who prepare for it most wisely.